The night was still and dark over the coastal Tunisian town of Sidi Bou Said. Inside a villa, a man known across the Arab world as Abu Jihad sat working late, reviewing documents related to the Palestinian uprising raging far away. Outside, a team of Israeli commandos moved silently through the sleeping streets, their rubber-soled boots making no sound on the cobblestones. They had traveled over 2,000 miles for this moment, crossing seas and evading radars to penetrate deep into a sovereign nation. Within 90 seconds of breaching his door, Abu Jihad would be dead, struck by 52 bullets in one of the most audacious assassinations Mossad had ever conducted on foreign soil. To understand how and why this mission happened, and why Israel risked an international incident by striking so far from its borders, we must first understand who Khalil al-Wazir was and what he represented. Born in 1935 in Ramla, within British Mandate Palestine, al-Wazir personally experienced displacement when his family fled during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. They settled as refugees in the Gaza Strip, a status that defined his identity and fueled a lifelong dedication to the Palestinian cause. Unlike many who accepted the refugee fate, al-Wazir rejected it completely. As a young man in Gaza during the 1950s, he immersed himself in political activism within Palestinian nationalist circles, attending secret meetings and organizing youth groups aimed at resistance. He was charismatic, intelligent, and possessed an organizational mind capable of turning abstract political goals into concrete plans of action. In 1959, he met Yasser Arafat in Kuwait, where both men were working. Arafat as an engineer, al-Wazir as a teacher. They bonded immediately over shared origins and a common vision. Together with a small group of like-minded individuals, they founded Fatah, a movement dedicated to armed struggle for the liberation of Palestine. The nom de guerre they chose for al-Wazir, Abu Jihad, meaning father of the holy struggle, proved prophetic. While Arafat became the political face of Fatah, Abu Jihad became its operational brain. He built training camps, recruited fighters, planned attacks, and constructed the military infrastructure that turned Fatah from a discussion group into a guerrilla army. His approach combined tactical pragmatism with strategic vision. He understood Palestinian fighters could not defeat the Israeli military in a conventional war, so he focused on asymmetric tactics, raids, ambushes, and attacks that inflicted damage on Israel while keeping Palestinian resistance a visible force. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, Abu Jihad orchestrated hundreds of operations against Israeli targets. Some were military in nature. Assaults on army bases, ambushes of patrols, cross-border raids. Others targeted civilians, bus hijackings, shootings, and bombings that killed non-combatants. From Israel's perspective, Abu Jihad was a terrorist mastermind responsible for innocent deaths. From a Palestinian perspective, he was a freedom fighter using the only means available to resist occupation and achieve self-determination. This fundamental disagreement over the legitimacy of armed resistance to military occupation was never resolved, and it fueled the conflict that ultimately led to his death. One operation above all cemented Abu Jihad's place in both Palestinian heroic mythology and Israeli threat assessments: the Coastal Road Massacre of March 1978. Palestinian fighters landed by boat on Israel's coast north of Tel Aviv, hijacked a bus heading into the city, and engaged in a prolonged gun battle with Israeli forces that ended with the deaths of 38 Israeli civilians, including 13 children. Abu Jihad planned the operation from Beirut, coordinating logistics, selecting the fighters, and approving the target. The attack shocked Israeli society and triggered a massive military response. Days later, Israel invaded southern Lebanon in an operation aimed at destroying Palestinian infrastructure. But destroying infrastructure proved easier than destroying a movement. Fatah relocated its headquarters from Beirut to Tunis after Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which displaced PLO forces from their Lebanese base. Tunisia, a moderate Arab state with no border with Israel, seemed safe from Israeli retaliation. The Tunisian government granted the Palestinians diplomatic status, providing security and allowing them to operate openly. Arafat established his headquarters in a compound in a Tunis suburb, while Abu Jihad settled into a villa in Sidi Bou Said, a picturesque coastal town about 15 kilometers north of the capital. From this comfortable distance over 2,000 miles from Israel, Abu Jihad continued his work. He coordinated Fatah's military operations, maintained contact with cells in the occupied territories, planned attacks, and directed the organization's armed wing. Israeli intelligence monitored him constantly through electronic surveillance, informants, and satellite imagery, but physical elimination seemed impossible. Tunisia was a sovereign state with normal diplomatic relations across the international community. Conducting a military operation, there would be an act of war, risking diplomatic isolation and international condemnation. For years, Israeli planners considered Abu Jihad untouchable, despite his ongoing role in attacks that killed Israelis. What changed the calculus was the Intifada. In December 1987, spontaneous protests erupted across the West Bank and Gaza Strip. What began as seemingly minor incidents quickly grew into a sustained civil uprising. Palestinians threw stones at Israeli soldiers, erected barricades, organized strikes, and confronted occupation forces with a resolve that surprised both Israeli authorities and the Palestinian leadership. The uprising was initially organic and leaderless, flowing from accumulated frustration rather than organizational direction. But Abu Jihad quickly recognized its strategic significance. From his office in Tunis, he worked to harness the Intifada's energy and provide direction to what had begun as spontaneous resistance. He communicated with local leaders via couriers and encrypted messages, provided funding for activities, coordinated media coverage to ensure international attention, and encouraged tactics that maximized pressure on Israel while maintaining popular participation. Israeli intelligence intercepted many of these communications and concluded Abu Jihad had become the de facto commander of the Intifada, turning a disorganized revolt into a sustained campaign. Israeli casualties mounted as the Intifada continued. Soldiers faced stone-throwing protesters daily. Molotov cocktails burned vehicles. Palestinian youth ambushed patrols in narrow alleyways. The Israel Defense Forces responded with rubber bullets, tear gas, and arrests, but the uprising proved impossible to suppress with conventional security measures. International media showed Israeli soldiers confronting unarmed protesters, damaging Israel's image and generating sympathy for Palestinians. The economic costs were significant, the political costs greater still. Within Israeli intelligence and military circles, debates intensified about how to respond. Some advocated political solutions, negotiations, concessions addressing root causes. Others insisted on harsher security measures, more arrests, stricter law enforcement, collective punishment. But a third faction, concentrated in Mossad and IDF special operations, advocated decapitation strikes against Palestinian leadership. Abu Jihad became the prime target. Intelligence assessments identified him as the key figure linking the PLO leadership in Tunis with activists in the occupied territories. Remove him, and the Intifada would lose its most capable organizer. The operation required approval at the highest level from Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Both had extensive security backgrounds and understood the risks of conducting an assassination in Tunisia, but they also felt pressure to respond decisively to the Intifada. And Abu Jihad represented the highest value target available. Mission planning began in early 1988 under extreme secrecy. The mission was assigned to Sayeret Matkal, the IDF's elite reconnaissance unit, working in coordination with Mossad's operational department. The team would consist of about 24 commandos plus support personnel, delivered to Tunisia aboard Israeli Navy missile boats and civilian vessels. They would land near Tunis, drive to Abu Jihad's villa, eliminate him, and evacuate before Tunisian authorities could respond. The entire operation was to be completed in under 3 hours to avoid interception. The first task was intelligence gathering. Mossad had monitored Abu Jihad for years, but the level of detail required for a successful assault demanded intense focus. Agents in Tunisia repeatedly surveilled his villa, noting window and door placements, guard presence, street layouts, and activity patterns. They recorded which rooms had lights on at different times, when Abu Jihad typically retired, whether he kept a weapon in his study. Electronic surveillance provided additional intelligence. Phone intercepts revealed his schedules, meetings, and movements. One critically important piece of intelligence came from Palestinian sources themselves. Mossad recruited informants within PLO circles, individuals motivated by money, ideology, or personal grievance to provide information on their colleagues. One such source confirmed Abu Jihad's nightly routine. He typically worked late in his second-floor study, often staying there until 2 or 3 in the morning while his family slept upstairs. This information proved decisive in planning the attack's timing. The operational logistics were extraordinary. Israeli forces had to traverse over 1,000 miles by sea, land undetected on a hostile shore, reach a target in a foreign city, execute a killing, and evacuate without being captured or killed. The operation required precise coordination between naval vessels, intelligence assets on the ground in Tunisia, the assault team itself, and command elements back in Israel tracking progress in real time. Any single point of failure, a navigation error, unexpected guard presence, mechanical breakdown could doom the mission. Israeli Navy missile boats would provide the primary transport, but they remained at sea to avoid detection. Smaller craft ferried the commandos to shore under cover of darkness. Once ashore, the team used vehicles prepositioned in Tunisia by Mossad agents, rented cars and vans that blended with local traffic. The assault team wore civilian clothes during the drive to maintain stealth, changing into combat gear only moments before the attack. The assault team underwent intensive training on a full-scale replica of Abu Jihad's villa constructed at a secret military base in Israel. They rehearsed entering the house, clearing rooms, identifying the target, and withdrawing under various scenarios. They practiced dozens of times until every movement was automatic. The unit commander, whose identity remains classified, demanded perfection. Hesitation or confusion during the actual operation could mean death for his men or mission failure. One unusual aspect of the preparation involved a female Mossad agent who played a critical role in the operation's success. She traveled to Tunisia weeks before the attack, posing as a tourist, and settled in Sidi Bou Said. On the night of the operation, she would serve as the ground coordinator, providing real-time intelligence on conditions near the villa, confirming Abu Jihad's presence and guiding the assault team to the target. Her presence in Tunisia embodied the calculated risks Mossad routinely took. If caught, she faced severe consequences, but her intelligence was invaluable. On April 15, 1988, the operation commenced as Israeli missile boats departed their base and headed west across the Mediterranean. The transit took approximately 20 hours, with the vessels maintaining strict radio silence to avoid detection. The commandos on board repeatedly reviewed their assignments, studied photographs and maps, and checked weapons and equipment. All understood they were embarking on one of the most audacious operations in Israeli military history, conducting an assassination deep inside a sovereign nation thousands of miles from home. The missile boats reached Tunisian waters after dark on April 16, holding position roughly 60 miles offshore. Smaller boats ferried the assault team to the coastline, carefully maneuvering to avoid Tunisian patrol vessels. The landing occurred on a beach north of Tunis around midnight. The commandos came ashore and quickly moved inland to a predetermined rendezvous point. Mossad agents who had prepositioned the vehicles met them there, handing over keys and providing last-minute intelligence updates. Everything was on schedule. The drive to Sidi Bou Said took approximately 30 minutes, with the convoy of civilian cars obeying traffic laws and speed limits to avoid attention. The female Mossad agent, positioned in a cafe near Abu Jihad's villa, confirmed via encrypted radio that the light in his study remained on and no unusual guard presence was visible. The assault team parked a few hundred meters from the target and conducted final preparations, loading weapons, donning tactical gear, synchronizing watches. The operation was entering its most dangerous phase. At approximately 2:45 a.m., the team approached Abu Jihad's villa on foot. The street was quiet, the surrounding residences dark. Palestinian guards were posted outside the villa, 2 at the gate, with additional security inside. The Israelis moved with practiced precision. Their suppressed weapons made little noise as they neutralized the external guards. Within seconds, they breached the main entrance and stormed into the house. Abu Jihad was in his second-floor study, exactly where intelligence predicted. He heard commotion downstairs and reached for a weapon, but the commandos were already in the room. The team leader fired first, others following in rapid succession. Israeli sources maintain Abu Jihad was armed and reaching for his weapon when shot. Palestinian sources describe an unarmed man shot while trying to protect his family. What is not disputed is the number of rounds fired. 52 bullets struck Abu Jihad, killing him instantly and with overwhelming force. His wife, Intisar, awakened by the gunfire, rushed downstairs to find Israeli commandos in her home and her husband dead. One of the Israelis spoke to her in Arabic, telling her to stay calm and remain with her children. The commandos conducted a quick search of the study, collecting documents, papers, and videotapes that might hold intelligence value. The entire assault, from breaching the door to departing the villa, lasted approximately 90 seconds, a testament to the rehearsed precision characteristic of Israeli special operations. The evacuation proceeded as smoothly as the assault. The team piled back into their vehicles and drove back toward the coastline, maintaining the same disciplined speed as during the approach. The female Mossad agent, her role complete, departed Tunisia separately via normal channels. Her connection to the operation remained undetected. Within 2 hours of the killing, the assault team reached the beach, boarded their boats, and began the return journey to the missile boats waiting in open water. Tunisian authorities discovered Abu Jihad's body around 3:30 a.m. when neighbors who heard gunshots called police. The scene they encountered shocked them. A senior PLO official assassinated in his home. Israeli shell casings littered around his body, documents and videotapes missing from his study. The implications were immediately clear. Israel had conducted a military operation inside Tunisia, violating sovereignty and international law with brazen disregard for diplomatic consequences. The Palestinian reaction was one of rage and grief. Thousands attended Abu Jihad's funeral in Damascus days later, where mourners carried his coffin through streets filled with supporters. Yasser Arafat delivered a eulogy praising his fallen comrade as a martyr and vowing the Intifada would continue. Palestinian factions across the political spectrum condemned the assassination, and protests erupted across the occupied territories. Several Israelis were killed in retaliatory acts within days of the operation. The international response was almost universally critical. The United Nations Security Council condemned the operation as a violation of Tunisia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The United States, Israel's closest ally, abstained from the vote rather than vetoing it, signaling displeasure with the operation's audacity. Tunisia severed diplomatic relations with several countries it accused of complicity and demanded international action against Israel. Arab states called for sanctions and punishment. Israel's official response was deliberately ambiguous. Government spokesmen refused to confirm or deny responsibility for the killing, adhering to a policy of not commenting on intelligence operations. This calculated ambiguity served several purposes. It avoided giving other nations explicit grounds for diplomatic action, while simultaneously signaling to Palestinians and Arab states that Israel could reach anyone, anywhere. The message was clear even without official confirmation. Attacks on Israeli civilians would bring consequences that extended beyond borders. Within Israeli intelligence and military circles, the operation was considered a tactical success. The assault team executed its mission flawlessly, eliminated a high-value target, collected valuable intelligence, and returned without casualties. From a purely operational standpoint, the Tunis raid represented special operations at its finest. Detailed planning, precise execution, and successful extraction from a hostile environment 1,000 miles from home. But the strategic consequences proved more ambiguous. Abu Jihad's death did not end the Intifada as Israeli planners had hoped. The uprising continued for several more years, ultimately leading to a peace process rather than Palestinian surrender. Some historians argue that eliminating Abu Jihad, who represented a relatively pragmatic voice within the PLO leadership, actually empowered more radical factions and made future negotiations harder. The assassination became a rallying point for Palestinians. Abu Jihad was transformed into a martyr, his image adorning posters and his name becoming synonymous with resistance. The operation also revealed the extreme measures Israel was willing to take to eliminate threats, setting a precedent for future targeted killings. A willingness to conduct military operations in sovereign countries, violate international law when security interests demanded it, and accept diplomatic isolation as the price for tactical advantage became a hallmark of Israeli counterterrorism strategy. The Tunis raid demonstrated capabilities that would be refined and repeated in operations from Dubai to Tehran to Damascus in subsequent decades. For Tunisia, the operation was a humiliating breach that exposed the limits of sovereignty in an era of global intelligence agency reach. Despite providing security and granting the PLO official diplomatic status, Tunisia failed to protect its guests from a determined adversary with technical superiority. The ease with which Israeli forces penetrated Tunisian territory, completed their mission, and escaped unopposed revealed vulnerabilities that embarrassed the government and raised questions about security capabilities. The female Mossad agent who served as ground coordinator during the operation remained in Tunisia for several days after the killing, maintaining her tourist cover before departing normally via the airport. Her role remained undisclosed for many years, and even now her identity remains classified. Her presence exemplified the human intelligence element that complemented technical capabilities. Satellites could show the villa's layout, but only someone on the ground could confirm Abu Jihad's presence and provide real-time updates on security conditions. The intelligence materials seized from Abu Jihad's study provided Israeli analysts with valuable insights into PLO operations, including links to activists in the occupied territories, financial records, and organizational charts. This material informed subsequent operations and helped Israeli security forces disrupt networks Abu Jihad had built. In this sense, the operation yielded benefits beyond simply removing one man. It damaged organizational capacity and provided intelligence that improved Israel's understanding of Palestinian operations. Abu Jihad's family remained in Tunisia for several years after his death before relocating. His wife, Intisar, became politically active herself, eventually working within the Palestinian National Authority after the Oslo Accords created limited Palestinian self-rule. She never forgave Israel for the killing and spoke publicly about watching her husband die as commandos systematically fired dozens of rounds into him. Her account humanized the operation's target, reminding audiences that behind military titles and operational code names was a husband and father killed in front of his family. Debates over targeted killing as counterterrorism policy intensified after the Tunis operation. Proponents argued that eliminating key terrorists prevented future attacks and degraded organizational capacity. Critics contended assassinations created martyrs, inspired retaliation, and violated international legal norms without achieving lasting security benefits. This debate continues today. Israel has conducted hundreds of targeted killings, and other nations have increasingly adopted similar tactics. One question that troubled Israeli planners afterward was whether the operation was worth the diplomatic costs. International condemnation was severe and lasting. Tunisia expelled the Israeli diplomatic mission and severed relations. Other countries scaled back cooperation with Israeli intelligence. The UN passed resolutions condemning the operation. Yet from Israel's security perspective, these diplomatic costs were acceptable if the operation saved Israeli lives by disrupting Palestinian military capability. The assassination also had unintended consequences for Palestinian politics. Abu Jihad was a powerful counterweight to more radical figures within Fatah and the broader PLO. His death altered internal power dynamics, strengthening hardliners who opposed compromise with Israel. Some scholars argue this ultimately made peace negotiations more difficult as moderate voices lost influence. It remains a subject of historical debate how accurately Israel assessed this political dynamic before authorizing the operation. The technical complexity of the Tunis raid influenced special operations planning within armed forces worldwide. The ability to project force over vast distances, deliver precision strikes on hostile territory, and evacuate without casualties became a model studied in military academies. The operation demonstrated that with sufficient planning, intelligence, and training, even targets that seemed geographically protected were vulnerable to determined adversaries with advanced capabilities. For Mossad and Israeli special forces, the operation became legendary within the organization, a textbook execution of an extraordinarily difficult mission. Personnel involved were internally celebrated, though their identities remained classified for years. Some details eventually surfaced in memoirs and sanctioned histories, but many particulars remain secret even decades later. The commandos who pulled the triggers, the intelligence officers who planned the operation, and the decision-makers who authorized it all understood they were part of something that would be studied and debated long after their retirement. Today, Abu Jihad is remembered differently depending on perspective. In Palestinian collective memory, he embodies heroic resistance to occupation, a leader who never surrendered despite impossible circumstances and paid for his dedication with his life. Streets, schools, and squares bear his name. His image appears alongside other Palestinian martyrs on murals and posters. For Palestinians, his assassination represents Israeli brutality and a willingness to kill those who resist occupation. In Israeli memory, Abu Jihad represents a terrorist mastermind responsible for civilian deaths who met a deserved end. The Coastal Road massacre and other attacks he orchestrated killed innocents, and his elimination prevented future bloodshed. The Tunis operation is remembered as a bold and successful military action that demonstrated Israel's resolve to defend its citizens no matter where the threat originates. The truth, as is often the case in conflicts defined by competing narratives, is more complex than either side acknowledges. Abu Jihad was both a nationalist leader fighting for his people's self-determination and an architect of attacks that killed civilians. The operation that killed him was both a violation of international law and a legitimate act of self-defense. The 52 bullets that struck him were both an assassination and a justified elimination of a military threat. Which interpretation one accepts depends entirely on one's view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself. And that fundamental disagreement remains as unresolved today as it was on that April morning in 1988 when Israeli commandos left Sidi Bou Said and returned across the Mediterranean. Their mission was accomplished, but the conflict was destined to continue. If you found this deep dive into a pivotal moment in history insightful, please show your support by liking this video. Sharing it helps others discover these complex stories, and subscribing ensures you never miss an exploration of the decisive events that shape our world over these complex stories. And subscribing ensures you never miss an exploration of the decisive events that shape our world.